As long as there are doubts in science, a fact is not considered established. We have seen the energetic individuals from the Apollo missions. No one returns from space energetic. Compared to military expenditures, the costs of space exploration are negligible. Every smart person tries to come up with something new, but history will teach this fool. I am not going to prove to you that the Americans went to the moon, nor am I going to prove that the Americans didn't go.
Good evening, esteemed viewers, everyone present here, and those watching us online. Good evening, Alexander Ivanovich.
Good evening.
We should talk specifically about the moon now, because these days mark another anniversary of the events over 50 years ago when the Americans informed the world that they had gone to the moon. But, oddly enough, in the last few days, we have received reports concerning the moon. Just the day before yesterday, the Space Research Institute, through its director, announced that Luna 25 is scheduled to be launched to our natural satellite at the beginning of August. Last week, it seems, the Chinese published a scientific article from a conference in the city of Wuhan, known to everyone due to certain events 3 years ago. The article states that by the end of this decade, the Chinese plan to implement a manned program with the landing of 2 taikonauts on the moon. They prepared a mission program with 2 spacecraft. They plan to launch all the payload into space, dock, and embark on this wonderful journey. For you, as a Ph.D. in physics and mathematics, a person who has dedicated his entire scientific and professional life to working in the space industry, what does the moon represent for you now? Why is this study essential for you?
This is currently outside the main content. You know, I remembered how a reader reacted to one of my early works. Well, whether they were there or not, what difference does it make to us? Many years have passed since then. Note that indeed, dozens, probably hundreds of broadcasts have already been released on this topic. It would seem that everything has been exhausted, everything has been chewed over. But the interest does not fade. What does this say? I will talk about the defeat in the moon race. Was it a hoax, as some believe? Was it a real landing? It was a defeat. It touched the spirit of our people so deeply that the interest in this question, what really happened, remains to this day. I want to clarify my position, so that it runs as a general theme through my entire story. I am not going to prove to you that the Americans went to the moon, nor am I going to prove that the Americans didn't go. I will tell you why. I do not find the arguments, the facts, the materials that NASA presented to justify the landings, convincing for me personally. And I want to share this with you. Then you can decide for yourself whether it is convincing or not. I want to start by talking about the color of the moon. In this slide, we see 3 familiar views of the moon. In the morning and early in the day, it is whitish, slightly tinged with a blue haze, especially around the edges. This is understandable. We are looking at it through the atmosphere. We are essentially looking at it through the blue sky. Similarly, when we look at distant mountains through a thickness of air, they become blue. This is not because different trees grow there. We are looking through a thickness of blue air. This happens because the atmosphere distorts the picture by scattering sunlight. Next picture. Now we need to talk about the scattering of moonlight. Evening moon. It's already dusk, the bright blue sky is gone, and the atmosphere is dusty. Warm air currents have lifted a lot of dust into the atmosphere. Through the suspension of large particles, red rays pass best, while the others are sort of cut off, weakened. And so, we see a red moon. At night, if we wait a bit, the dust will settle, and there's no blue glow. Scientists used to believe that at night we see the true color of the moon. And it is white, or as poets say, silvery. We often say, silvery moon. This viewpoint existed for about 200, maybe even 300 years. Modern telescopic astronomy is about 200 years old. There were no doubts. Well, the moon is white. At the same time, it was understood that if it reflects light, and from astronomical measurements it is known that the moon is a dark object, then it poorly reflects. So, it's gray, and just against a very black sky, it appears bright. This is indeed the case. For example, if we wrapped the moon in black velvet, it would shine only about twice as dimly as it does now on our earthly night sky. And it would still be white. Actually, the moon turned out to be quite a trickster and kept us in the dark on this issue for 200 years. Excuse the expression. I will talk about the work of Soviet astronomers because they were ahead in this matter and significantly outpaced the Americans. By the way, why is the color of the moon important? Imagine we selected the strongest men and women. Nowadays, it must be 50-50. And we announced that we are organizing a mission to the moon. If we organize a real mission, then it doesn't really matter what color the moon is. Well, the atmosphere deceives us. We'll arrive there, it's space, no atmosphere. We'll figure out what it really looks like. We'll come back and report. But if we are preparing a hoax, we must know the color of the moon in advance. And it's hard to find out. That's how changeable our moon is. It so happened that accurate knowledge about the color of the moon came around the same time or even later than when the Americans were preparing their missions to the moon. Already in 1954, the Great Soviet Encyclopedia published a short note stating that Soviet astronomers had discovered that the surface of the moon is mainly covered with dark material of a brownish tint.
Установили, что поверхность Луны в основном покрыта темным веществом коричневатого оттенка. Но при этом никто не
But no one had seen pictures of this brown moon. The fact is that color photography was very complex at that time. I dealt with it myself. And by the way, I have a basic astronomical education. Half of Moscow's astronomers took 3-year astronomy courses that were held at the Moscow Planetarium at that time. And I attended them. We still had a white-gray globe of the moon in the lobby. But we need to see what the moon really looks like. And in 1969, such an opportunity arose. I was a student at the time, and later a graduate student, while the Soviet Union was preparing for a manned flyby of the moon. Our cosmonauts were supposed to go. Following the principle of protecting the health and safety of people, unmanned Soyuz spacecraft were first sent to fly around the moon, the same ones you hear a lot about today. Initially, the Soyuz was created specifically for a lunar flyby. As one of Korolyov's associates said, the Soyuz spacecraft has a lunar origin. The program for launching unmanned Soyuz spacecraft to the moon was called Zond. In August 1969, right after the Apollo 11 mission, the Zond 7 spacecraft was launched towards the moon. Among other tasks, it had the following mission. By the way, at that time, color transmission via radio-television channels was practically impossible. Only black and white images were transmitted. Digital photography was unheard of. So, if you wanted a good color picture, you had to send a camera to the moon, take the photo, return the camera to Earth with the spacecraft, develop the film, and so on. That's how you would get such a photograph. We were able to accomplish this task with Zond 7. The Americans did not return a single spacecraft from the moon because in this case a spacecraft re-enters atmosphere at the escape velocity, and the thermal load is about twice as high. This spacecraft took a photo of Earth from a distance of 70,000 kilometers. But, of course, no one knew whether it had worked out well. Only when it returned did we see that it was a beautiful photo. We can see Saudi Arabia, North Africa, and other territories. The Earth is white, and the oceans are dark blue. That means the color rendering of Zond 7 was accurate. Notice, the blue Earth or the Earth with blue clouds is a reference point. This is very important. We can say that this photo has satisfactory color reproduction. And then the following happened. Interestingly, after the Zond 7 mission, the photos of the moon I am showing were not published. They were only published in 1980. Apparently, someone decided to keep the true color of the moon up their sleeve. 4 photos showing the moon as brown, the color we see here, the brown moon, were published. We are now discussing what the moon looks like. On the left, we see a photo published in 1980 in the book, Cosmonautics in the USSR. On the right is a photo from a website. Why do I prefer book versions? With a simple turn of a knob, let alone with various Photoshop techniques, any digital photo can be altered. On the left, I am showing you a document. This is from a book that came out in a year when there were no digital images. This is a photo document. But I emphasize that it was not published. In popular magazines, there was a beautiful photo of the Earth, which you have seen, showing that the color reproduction was correct. But in the magazines, Knowledge is Power, Science and Life, and Earth and the Universe, images of the moon with a lilac surface, a greenish-gray surface, and a brown surface were published. It seems like everything was published. Try to figure out what color the moon is. Actually, this was an excellent method of secrecy. This is an excerpt from the Bulletin of the Academy of Sciences of the USSR, 1970. Visual observation from the Soyuz 9 spacecraft. The cosmonauts were greatly impressed by the brown moon with whitish spots above the blue horizon of the Earth. Cosmonaut Sevastyanov called this very contrasting sight one of the most impressive. So, he talks about it as if it were something new. Now, with digital photographs, you click and immediately see the result. You can make the necessary corrections, like adjusting the white balance. Here, you can see a photo of the moon, on the left, from Earth's orbit. I don't remember if this was taken from the shuttle or the ISS. A photo of the moon through a telescope. The photo on the right was taken by my good friend, a Muscovite and professional photographer Alexander Solovyan. A brown moon. I already mentioned the year 1980, when photos from Zond 7 were first published. That's also when the first brown school globes appeared. Look, on the right, a schoolgirl is standing by a brown globe. In the planetarium, where there used to be a white moon globe, a brown globe appeared. In the middle, there's also a brown-toned globe in the Museum of Cosmonautics in Kaluga. Long story short, now it's known that the moon is brown. Let's go back to the years of the moon race. In 1969, Zond 7 was the only probe to photograph the brown moon, which was classified. By the way, I don't think it matters if it's dark brown or orange brown, it's all the same. The important thing is that it's not gray. Is the brown color of the moon surprising? No. Look at how the desert areas of Earth look from space, from orbit. On the left is Saudi Arabia, on the right is the Sahara Desert. They have yellow-brown or orange-brown tones of sands or darker mountain rocks. People often ask me, why didn't anyone figure it out earlier? I always answer, if I were as smart before, as my wife is after. And if someone doesn't like that, swap the husband and wife, it stays the same. When everything is clear and known, one might wonder, why didn't I figure it out earlier? It took a long time to get there. And that includes me. What did the Americans have? I repeat, the Americans did not return any spacecraft from the moon, which means they did not have the opportunity to return film either. They transmitted images only by radio or television channels, which were fundamentally black and white both for us and for them. There weren't enough megabits and megabytes to transmit color images. Distance is also important, 400,000 kilometers. The signal is still very weak. This is not like a satellite dish that receives a signal from about 40,000 kilometers. I won't specify the exact number. The moon is 10 times farther away, so the signal is 100 times weaker. A gray moon matched the American perceptions quite well. We now move on to studying hard copy documentation. This is a scan from a real printed publication, Life magazine. This is a special edition, entirely dedicated to Apollo 11. It was published in August 1969. Thanks to some people, I have it. What do we see here? This is a famous photo. You've probably seen it many times. An astronaut stands against a gray moon, even though it is brown. But in 1969, this was not known. And I didn't know it either. I don't know if I've told you or not, but for about 30 years I absolutely believed in the moon landings. Well, the Americans beat us. As they say, you have to know how to lose. But here we see an astronaut on a gray moon. In the same magazine, I open a full spread, and there's a photo. The astronaut stands and there is a caption. On the windless plain, Aldrin saluted the American flag. Here it is, the national flag. It is very important to us. It is a mark of color reproduction. The flag is colored, with red stripes. We see the flag, so we can trust the color reproduction. Mainly, of course, not in details. We don't need the details very much. The American moon is gray, but we know that it is brown. American astronauts were photographed against the gray-blue globe of the moon. Here too is a resonant caption. Aldrin, Collins, Armstrong are heroes of history's greatest exploration. And that was the end of that issue of Life magazine. But there's one point to consider. Well, yes, the moon is brown. So, Earth probably isn't red either. But you can find other colors. For instance, I saw stunning photos of a red desert in Australia. Just red, plain and simple. Maybe Apollo 11 accidentally landed in a gray area. Well, not exactly accidentally, it's not that small, about 20 to 30 kilometers around. And that's it, they saw a gray moon. Everything's fine. So, I looked at other photos. The Americans announced 6 Apollo landings. I took 6 photos from different websites. Now these are digital images. The previous photo was a photo document. I emphasize, it was from life. These are digital images. But they show the same thing. Here I took 6 images for different Apollos. 11, 12, 14. They claim 13 flew by the moon. Apollo 15, 16, 17. The only criterion was that there should be a flag, because the flag is a mark of good color reproduction. Everywhere the Americans have a gray moon. So, they planted 6 flags on a gray moon. And I think, how is that possible? Now we all know that the moon is brown. There's a discrepancy. This is an artistic digression. Now we'll see how to actually see a white moon turning brown. Look at the screen. If you don't mind, listen to my commentary. This is a video. It's dedicated to a completely different issue, the construction of the Crimean Bridge. But the author liked the moon and filmed it against the Crimean landscape. He changes the zoom. He has a telephoto lens that captures the entire moon. The moon becomes brown. Now he switches back to the usual angle, and the moon becomes white again. For those interested in the technical details of why this happens, I can explain it privately. If you want to photograph a brown moon, first set your camera's white balance, preferably during the day. Second, use a telephoto lens to capture the entire moon, ensuring that the surrounding sky does not interfere with various effects. That's it, you'll get a brown moon. But for the Americans, it's gray. On this note, I want to conclude the first part, the color of the moon. What does our esteemed host suggest? Shall we take a break?
No, we will continue without a break. But first, I have a clarifying question for you. If you would, please use the clicker to bring up the slide with the probe flying by the moon diagram. Meanwhile, I have a question. Watching Soviet films from the 1980s, one must admit that the color reproduction in some films differs from the quality of Hollywood films. Could it be that the photographs that came back from the Soviet probe flying by the moon have such color because of the quality of the film on which they were taken?
I can only reiterate. The reference point is Earth. There is no other information. If there is a blue Earth, then my confidence in this image increases. By the way, among us is a cinematographer and creator of several domestic films. I think he could help with this question. Sorry for interrupting you a bit.
But is this Soviet film?
I don't know that.
Why do I ask? In several sources, I read, and I think even in your book, that there is a version stating that the film used on this probe was obtained by our specialists from the Matthias Rust airplane, which flew over the territory of the Soviet Union several years before that.
Oh, what an interesting story someone came up with. The thing is, the Zond 7 flew in 1969, and Rust's plane landed during Gorbachev's time. That was around 1987.
Powers. I confused the name.
Powers in 1960, a complete alibi. If it was the reconnaissance plane of Powers, it was shot down in May 1960. And this mission was in August 1969, a short time span, but still an alibi. I also want to say something about attitudes towards various theories. You know, I can come up with as many theories as you like. What data is there? Are there any documents? Did they come from the CIA, military intelligence, or the KGB? For example, I could propose a theory that there are square planets in the Andromeda Nebula. Try to prove that there are no square planets there. You can't do that. Everyone must prove the thesis they present to the public. That's my response. If Leonid adds something during the break, I'll be very grateful.
During the break?
As you prefer, the host will decide.
What is another simple argument you, as a great scientist, but not even as a doctor of sciences, just as an observant person, consider important to convey to our audience?
Thank you, esteemed host. Pay attention and correct me if I'm wrong. But did it require any special knowledge for what I just told you about the color of the moon? I don't think so. It just requires observation. For example, if someone says they conquered Everest and found red snow there, don't believe them at first, because you've all seen white snow, and then you investigate further. The only thing my profession as a physicist has taught me, which relates to this topic, is the observation that we need in our work, just like all scientists. But every cook praises his own broth, so I praise physics. The secrets of nature do not jump out at us like cabaret girls saying, "Look at me, I look great." No, you have to literally guess bit by bit and then pull it out. You need logic and observation. All I want to talk about is observation. The next example of observation I conditionally called energetic Apollo crew. It's probably clear to everyone that if someone tells you they returned from Everest an hour ago or from some challenging event, a match, anything, but they look fresh as a daisy, well-groomed, not sweaty, and so on, you start to doubt their words. You can't prove they didn't climb Everest, but you have every right not to believe them. So, here we see three people. I called them the energetic Apollo crew. I think that a trip to the moon is no less challenging than to Everest. But it's simply amazing if someone returns from such a difficult journey looking very energetic. This May, I got a very good assistant, and I'm very pleased about it. It's Dmitry Rogozin, the former head of Roscosmos from 2018 to 2022, and a very respected person. Here's his post on Telegram, quite recent, published on May 7th this year. He writes, "About 10 years ago, when I was working in the government, I sent an official request to Roscosmos to provide me with the available documentary evidence that the Americans went to the moon. What bothered me was the fact that returning from multi-day missions, Soviet cosmonauts could barely stand on their feet, while the Americans were climbing out of their moon spacecraft as sound as a roach." Do you know what I got in response? The book, Conquest of the Moon by astronauts, with a comment from cosmonaut Leonov that they were indeed there because they themselves told him so. Allow me another example from my life. I have a young friend, a colleague. Apparently, we have common interests, which is why he's a friend, because usually, friends are peers. I'll name him, in case someone wants to check, Konstantin Mihin. His father worked in the space sector. Where exactly, in the Rocket Design Bureau based in Ryazov or somewhere else, I don't remember. What's important is that somewhere in the 80s, our academicians and Communist Party workers were actively indoctrinating the space sector employees in the spirit of, do not doubt, the Americans went to the moon. Konstantin Mihin's father attended a meeting of space specialists and developers with American astronaut Eugene Cernan, who also supposedly went to the moon. Someone expressed doubts, like, the evidence was somewhat weak. In response, Cernan raised his hand. I'll raise mine, here the watch is visible. He raised this hand and said, this watch was on the moon. Do you have any more questions? The audience fell silent in admiration. You can also ask a beer vendor if their beer is fresh. Of course, they will say it's fresh. Naturally, American astronauts will say they went to the moon. Since we mentioned Rogozin, there's something important to note. Although Rogozin isn't the only one, he is an authority, so I can't overlook him. He articulated one thing. The physical condition of astronauts or cosmonauts immediately after re-entry is an indication of whether they flew or not. Rehabilitation, rest, whatever, comes later. But how do they look right now, having just come out of the spacecraft? Our cosmonauts rarely talk about this. Though I think every cosmonaut knows how they feel after re-entry. As far as I know, only one cosmonaut has spoken about it, and that was after he retired. This is cosmonaut Viktor Afanasyev. He retired in 2006. In 2015, he gave an interview. 555 hours in space, 10 spacewalks. As they say, he knows who is who and what is what in space. Reporter: what do you think about the theory that the Americans didn't go to the moon? Afanasyev: I think they didn't go. Compare the condition of cosmonauts upon atmospheric re-entry. Sevastyanov and Nikolaev, I will talk about these cosmonauts later, needed resuscitation, but the Americans come out looking fresh, smiling. Perhaps this is the only issue where cosmonauts truly speak from their own experience, as authorities. Because they didn't participate in testing American space technology. They weren't present at the launch sites where the rockets supposedly took off for the moon. It's often said, our people monitored everything. I know these operations well. They are conducted at radio telescopes, at ground telemetry stations, where the military conducts surveillance. This is highly classified work, and majors or lieutenant colonels not involved in these operations wouldn't be informed. Cosmonauts have nothing to do with it. They say, our specialists would have exposed it. Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't have, but politicians also wouldn't consult with cosmonauts on this issue. So where does their confidence come from? From hearsay. Essentially, that's what Leonov said. The American astronauts themselves told me they went to the moon. I am now moving on to the topic of how cosmonauts feel. We will look at some real documentary evidence. We will focus on that time in the past, but we will also look at the present. A few words about zero-G. I ask for forgiveness from those who know and understand it well. Perhaps, for some, this will still be useful. Zero-G is absolutely the same in Earth orbit missions, missions to the Moon, or to a neighboring galaxy. As they say, no weight means no weight. Zero is zero. And this allows us to compare the well-being of cosmonauts returning from orbital missions with the well-being of astronauts supposedly returning from the Moon. This is the first point. Second, why is zero-G so harmful? All living beings on Earth have been nurtured under the conditions of gravity. And when it is absent, we face trouble. Specifically, the body does not need to overcome gravity. Right now, my body is overcoming gravity. When it doesn't need to, muscles weaken. Nature doesn't preserve what isn't needed. The heart doesn't have to pump blood against gravity to my head, so the heart begins to shrink in size. As far as I remember, it shrinks by up to 20%. Bones don't need to support the skeleton against gravity. In a zero-G, one can assume any position. Calcium starts to leach out of the bones, making them fragile. And much more. How to combat this? There is only one way: exercise. In space, one must train regularly. Now there are treadmills on space stations, and cosmonauts work out for about 2 hours a day. But where is room in a cramped spacecraft? In Apollo, there were 2 cubic meters per person. Imagine a square meter and 2 meters high. That's your living space. Try stretching in it. You might bump into your neighbor. In the Soyuz, it's a bit more spacious, with 4 cubic meters, but it's still cramped. This restriction of movement is called hypodynamia. A friend of mine wrote something very insightful. I didn't believe your stories about how, after 5 days, we will see this, a person might completely forget how to walk. But once, I broke my leg and spent a month immobile in the hospital. When I was allowed to get up, I had to hold onto the wall to get to the bathroom. My skepticism about your information was gone like the wind. In summary, in spacecraft, zero-G plus hypodynamia quickly produce noticeable effects. 1969. The spacecraft Soyuz 7. 3 cosmonauts. One of them, Viktor Gorbatko, who is on the right, left some recollections. Another, Filipchenko, the commander, writes that he experienced the same as other cosmonauts, but since he was the commander, everything was better for him. In the middle is Vladimir Volkov, who died with the Salyut 1 crew. Viktor Gorbatko wrote, "I couldn't walk by myself." Let's look at the next slide. Familiar names. Nikolaev on the left, Sevastyanov on the right. On the Soyuz 9 spacecraft in 1970, they flew for 18 days. It should be noted that towards the end, they felt well. I forgot to mention one thing. Living beings adapt to everything, including zero-G. The real shock for a cosmonaut occurs during re-entry. These cosmonauts, Sevastyanov and Nikolaev, even after 16 days, reported to Earth that they felt well and asked to extend their mission. It's good that mission control didn't agree. So, what actually happens to a weakened body? When we don't exercise for a long time, we often think we can just get up and run, and so on. Nothing of the sort. You can't just get up and run. The body thinks it is strong, but then it gets overwhelmed by overloads. 3 to 4 Gs is like having 3 or 4 people pile on top of my weakened body. And at the parachute phase, it's even 5 G. These cosmonauts were sending normal reports from orbit just an hour before re-entry, but when the spacecraft was opened, they were both in a pre-heart attack condition. Sevastyanov, the one on the right, very interestingly described this experience. When we were loaded from the spacecraft into the helicopter and flew to Karaganda, I noticed that doctors suddenly started bustling around Andrei and Nikolaev. I couldn't walk, so I crawled to him on all fours. Notice, there it is, the walking. I crawled to him on all fours. I crawled up, and they were giving Nikolaev resuscitation injections. This is what the 18-day mission does. I emphasize, things are different on space stations. There are treadmills, and you can stay much longer. But they went to the moon in spacecraft, that's the point. After this flight, Soyuz spacecraft were not sent on missions longer than 8 days. And here is our last Soviet example. This is July 1975. The Soyuz 19 spacecraft spent 6 days in orbit. Cosmonauts Leonov and Kabasov are lying on stretchers. I haven't mentioned one thing, but it's still relevant. Why didn't the Americans find out about this? Why didn't they come out exhausted from their Apollo craft? Soviet secrecy is often criticized. But I believe this is a perfect case where Soviet secrecy showed itself at its best. Look at the photo. You see, the person on the right is filming with a movie camera. I haven't seen a single similar documentary. What's also important is that this is a restricted photo. It was declassified only in 2000, 25 years after this mission. All TASS reports during the mission years said, the physical condition of cosmonauts is satisfactory. The physical condition of cosmonauts is excellent. We managed to maintain secrecy. By the way, secrecy means that if people don't talk, everything will be kept secret. The Americans didn't know the physical condition of our returning cosmonauts. This is the first Apollo mission, supposedly just a low Earth orbit, Apollo 7, October 1968. This trio was supposedly in orbit for 11 days. 1 hour after splashdown. No comments. This is supposedly the first moon mission. Apollo 8 supposedly made a 6-day flight around the moon. 1 hour after splashdown. They are getting out of the helicopter that landed on the deck of the rescue ship. They come out and greet the welcoming crowd, the ship's crew, and so on. Any comments needed? They are both energetic and fresh as a daisy at the same time. Now we will look at the last episode. We have studied 37 of these perky astronauts. I apologize for not being able to talk about all 37. So, I showed you the first 2 Apollos, 7 and 8, and now I'll show the last one, which flew in 1975. Just as the capsule splashed down, they jumped out. Look, in 15 to 20 seconds, they all come out. The meeting is purely symbolic, a pat on the shoulder. By the way, this bald man, Robert Gilruth, not Wernher von Braun, is the true leader of the U.S. moon program. Then they didn't go to the doctors or the sickbay but to a rally. Their commander is speaking, then all 3 take turns speaking. Look at their relaxed postures. Just amazing. Lastly, let's dip a bit into the present time. So, we have documented what happened during the Apollo years. We call them the energetic Apollo crew. What about now? It's worth noting that there's a very interesting gap in the history of American manned spaceflight. Do you remember the shuttles? A magnificent craft. I won't discuss its usefulness for military purposes, which follow different standards, but for manned space missions, they were utterly unsuitable. They were terribly expensive. Since it was reusable, it had to be thoroughly checked after each mission. And what does it mean? It's not just tapping on it to see if the bolt is holding. It means conducting X-ray structural analysis, gamma spectroscopy, and so on. As a result, the preparation costs nearly half the price of a new shuttle. Each flight costs $700 million. A Soyuz mission is 10 times cheaper. That's one thing. Second, they were terribly dangerous. Perhaps I will show you photos later. 14 people died on shuttles. When the shuttle program was closed, they had to fly on our Soyuz spacecraft for a while. They were very upset about hitchhiking to orbit, feeling humiliated, but they didn't mention the Apollo. If you had a wonderful Apollo spacecraft and your astronauts couldn't get to the ISS, why not bring out your excellent Apollo and let them deliver you to the ISS? Everyone would see them and say, Popov is talking nonsense that the Apollo didn't fly. Here it is, arrived at the ISS. But that didn't happen. They flew on our Soyuz spacecraft until they finally made their own spacecraft recently. Look at how they appear after landing. Yes, they're joyful. Why wouldn't they be? The mission is complete. Some are carried, some sit. All the same. I'll skip the slide with the Americans. Here are the taikonauts, the Chinese cosmonauts. They're also joyful upon arrival, with smiles and greetings. But they sit, they are taken out of the spacecraft, and they are led by the arms. Finally, the last thing I want to show you is a broadcast from May 2023. It lasts 4 minutes. If you find it tedious, please tell me, and I'll stop. But for the sake of science, it's important to see 4 weak individuals being extracted from a spacecraft. Look at the screen and listen to me. This spacecraft spent 9 days in low Earth orbit. Moreover, during these 9 days, they spent more than half the time on the ISS. It was an easy mission. It's not like flying to the moon in a cramped capsule. Look at how they are taken out. They don't jump out, they are extracted. Now about their experience. The first astronaut is Peggy Whitson. She has a super experience in space. She has spent 2 years in space, with 10 spacewalks. You saw how she walked, barely moving her legs. Their ages range from 31 to 68 years, and both men and women. They all equally struggle to move their legs. And most importantly, they are transported. Off camera to the left, there is a gurney. You will see the gurney. It will appear and disappear only once. This is the third astronaut. I believe it's a woman. No, it's John Schaffner, the second astronaut. He is a space rookie but has 6,500 hours of flight time. This is also important. Remember, only pilots were selected for the first cosmonaut corps. 6,500 flight hours is a huge experience. The next one will be a young woman who has neither space nor flight experience, but she is 31 years old, young and charming. We are waiting for this charm to appear. By the way, there are also people inside. The astronauts are not getting out by themselves. This is shown in the extensive 2-hour video. People go inside and help the astronauts out.
Alexander Ivanovich, while the broadcast is ongoing, I want to draw the viewer's attention to the lower left corner. For comparison, there is that very photo of the cheerful guys from 1975. How they looked back then and how the astronauts are received on May 31st of this year. Did I get the date right?
Yes, half a century later. At the bottom left is what it was like half a century ago.
People say that medicine has advanced.
People say that medicine has advanced. By the way, I have experienced this myself, having visited several medical institutions due to my age. So, the third one gets out. This is the Saudi pilot. It seems they were trying to court Saudi Arabia in some way. Look at how he struggles to stand up and how he is lifted with full effort. There, he's been lifted to his feet. As they say, I couldn't walk by myself. I think these astronauts could say the same. He waved and smiled. But this man can't walk. And finally, the last astronaut. Should we watch him? Yes, let's watch. Otherwise, we might miss something, and people could say that someone actually sprang out cheerfully, and so on. No, it will be the same story. I think now it will be the young woman. See the gurney? They are about to wheel it out. There it goes, off camera. They will all be placed there. Why didn't we use wheeled gurneys? No one knows? Just simple stretchers. Have you tried pushing a gurney across the step? It's just easier here on flat ground, but out there it's uneven terrain, lichens, bumps. There he is, the same story. Who is this? Yes, this is a captain of the Air Force, a military pilot with 2,500 flight hours. That's all. What's the conclusion? The conclusion is that no one returns from space looking fresh. Of course, I'm not talking about one-day missions. For example, Gagarin flew for 1 hour and was thrilled by 0G. He simply didn't have time to feel it. But Tito flew for a day, and he already had a problem. He vomited, and here he had a belt of vomit. It's 0G after all. It was hard for him to get rid of it. When asked how he felt, he replied, "Terrible." We have seen the energetic individuals from the Apollo missions. No one returns from space energetic. Therefore, based on this criterion, a conclusion should be made. I conclude, and how you take it is up to you. These Apollos didn't even orbit the Earth, let alone going to the moon. That's why the Apollo craft didn't help America to bridge the gap after the shuttles until new craft were developed. This concludes my part. They are listening very well.
Allow me to ask a question. You just showed us recordings from 2023 and at the very end made an interesting suggestion that until recent years, that is, until the emergence of this generation of spacecraft, in your opinion, they did not carry out a manned spaceflight program. How then should we regard the well-known USSR-USA Apollo-Soyuz mission?
You noticed, dear host and esteemed guests, that the last slide, where the cheerful astronauts jump out, is from July 1975. This is that very Apollo-Soyuz mission. It's a very important different topic. I wouldn't delve into it here. Frankly, the conclusion doesn't change. The Soyuz flew alone.
Let's emphasize this again. The program itself existed. But in your opinion, there was only one real participant. And that's the Soviet part.
To put it simply, real space participants. Apart from that, the Americans participated to the fullest. How could they not? It had to be organized. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So, we were in space, and the Americans filmed it nicely?
First of all, these are not assumptions. I think if we meet again, I can show you photos and even clips. You know that the Cosmonaut Training Center has large aircraft that simulate zero-G? Everything was based on them. The joint mission was supposedly carried out in 1975. But in 1974, all the materials needed for showing in 1975 were already filmed and available. As our esteemed comrade Leonov said, may he rest in peace, only good things about the deceased. Everything needed for the show was filmed before the mission began. But frankly, I don't want to mix everything in one topic. Let's just outline it. If there's interest, I'll gladly tell you about it.
Thank you, Alexander Ivanovich. Let's give our viewers a chance to ask their questions. The host already has half a question.
I apologize. Thank you all for your attention.
So, professional questions have come in. The first one is, they say the Americans brought back several kilograms, many or few, I don't know, of lunar soil. They wrote 4 kilograms for some reason. Half was given out immediately, and people were able to conduct experiments and confirm that it was lunar soil. The other half was given out not so long ago to obtain some new results with new equipment. Have you heard anything about this, and doesn't it confirm that they did go to the moon?
I haven't specifically heard about 4 kilograms. I've heard about 400 kilograms that the Americans allegedly brought back. Lunar soil is a separate and very interesting topic. I want to mention that Alexei Pushkov, the host of the TV show Postscriptum, made a very interesting and concise broadcast on this topic. So, 400 kilograms. If you brought back 400 kilograms, if you are the conqueror of the moon and everything else, then don't be stingy. Send these samples for analysis, maybe not to everyone who wants them, but at least upon government requests. Instead, it is officially announced that the current methods for studying lunar soil are not so advanced. So we are preserving it for 45 years, and only our descendants will see it. This causes confusion. Well, allocate a fifth or a 10th part. A 10th part is still 40 kilograms. Finally, in 35 years, won't the next generation have rockets like Saturn V and Apollo spacecraft? They won't be able to go to the moon and collect fresh lunar soil? This is also doubtful. And now regarding what was handed over. How many reports have I heard about the exchange? I'll describe a situation that arose during the production of Pushkov's show. In Moscow, there is the Vernadsky Institute of Geochemistry, GEOCHI. Since Soviet times, it has been designated as the main institute for lunar soil. Any soil, whoever brings it, whether Martians, Americans, or Soviet robotic Luna probes, is distributed with the knowledge of GEOCHI. Accordingly, we can say that the head of GEOCHI is the main specialist in lunar soil. At that time, the institute was headed by academician Eric Galimov. May he rest in peace, he passed away in 2020. He refused to give an interview to Pushkov's studio. But the correspondent managed to corner even the academician. The correspondent was interesting, with experience in diplomatic work in the United States. The academician kindly agreed to speak with us over the phone. He was asked the following question. You are the chief lunar geochemist of the country. Please tell us, do you know anyone in the Soviet Union who has held a lunar rock in their hands? I emphasize, regarding a lunar rock, there are two types of soil that differ fundamentally, whether on Earth or on the Moon. The first is regolith, from lithos, meaning stone, and rego, meaning blanket. So, a stone blanket. This is sand, gravel, clay, sedimentary rocks, that is, the surface layer. And there are bedrocks. A boulder is a representative of bedrocks. Regolith could be delivered by robotic probes. And they did deliver it. 3 of our probes brought back 300 grams of regolith. The first of these was Luna 16. Remember this name, Luna 16. It will come up again. But they couldn't collect lunar rocks. We can discuss how it might have been possible to grab it with a manipulator and put it in a basket, but this was not part of the lunar probe's design. They could not bring back lunar rocks. For a human, it's not a problem. He goes, sees a rock lying there, and given the 1/6 gravity, he can bring it back. They allegedly brought back 400 kilograms of lunar rocks. If you have them, you don't need to show regolith, you don't need to show sand, just give us 1 lunar rock. Where are the leading experts on lunar soil? In the USA and in the USSR. The correspondent asks academician Galimov, please tell us, do you know of anyone in our country who has held a lunar rock in their hands? I don't know. I wasn't interested in that. Can you imagine? The chief lunar geochemist wasn't interested in that. Personally, I studied the soil from Luna 16. Well, that's it. The chief geochemist hasn't seen this rock. And you're telling me they handed over 4 kilograms or 2 kilograms. Maybe they did, but show it to us. If you want Soviet scientists to authoritatively confirm it, give them a lunar rock. They didn't receive a rock. Especially since, as you say, this is a new example, right? The conversation about these 4 kilograms came up recently. All the more reason. Comrades, handing soil over shouldn't be done in the 21st century. When they came back from the moon, that's when it should be handed over. That's my answer. It may sound confused, maybe you heard some unnecessary emotions, but I'm ready to talk separately with interesting illustrative materials. Let's set aside emotions. Did they go to the moon? Show the rock. No rock, no conversation.
So, the Chinese will have to bring a rock?
Of course, I think so. The main thing is that they know the moon is brown.
People are asking for 1 or 2 of the most important pieces of evidence proving that this was a moon hoax. Your opinion?
Dear hosts, I emphasize again that I am not proving the Americans didn't go to the moon. I am sharing what does not align with their statements about the moon missions. I could talk about design of the lunar rover, like how they throw rocks there or something else. In my view, I tried to choose the simplest pieces of evidence. By the way, I have a living witness here. I see him out of the corner of my eye. I hope he will also spare us the time. The man in the red tie is a very respected individual and a very experienced cinematographer with over 30 years of experience. He is an associate professor at the Gerasimov Institute of Cinematography, aka Geek, Leonid Konovalov. He has studied thousands of photographs taken on the moon and dozens, hundreds of videos. It must be said that he is not alone. A similar study is being conducted in Minsk by a director you know, Yuri Yelhov. If his name doesn't ring a bell, we often only remember the names of films, then remember the film, The Adventures of Buratino. That's his film. The general opinion of our film specialists, formed not hastily but after studying the materials. All video footage is fake. All this was fabricated in the studio. Forgive me, Leonid Vasilievich, for speaking on your behalf and reporting your results. Of course, there is another, I would say, piece of evidence, though not definitive proof. For example, this completely inconvenient fuss with lunar rocks. There's a children's saying, "We won't tell where we were, but we'll show what we did." Here, it's the opposite. We'll tell where we were, but we won't show what we did. Our friend, an ordinary citizen of the Russian Federation and a knowledgeable astronomer, Yuri Solomonov, contacted the Vernadsky Institute of Geochemistry with a request, "Could I see samples of the American lunar soil?" He received a response along the lines of, "We have samples, but they are not on display, and we won't talk to you." This is because he has been exposed as a skeptic of the moon missions. When someone cannot be transparent, it means something is fishy. And there are many such cases. I have shown you probably the most significant one so far. Personally, the color of the moon is important to me. Another crucial point, in my opinion, is the complete helplessness of the Americans from 2011 to 2020. Their leading professor, John Logsdon, a significant figure in NASA and a member of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, said, "That's a failure, an embarrassment, that we have to depend on Russian taxi services. When will we have a spacecraft?" In 2018, their vice president, who by virtue of his responsibilities in the administration oversees NASA, said, "For more than 7 years, we've been forced to hitch a ride to space." Why am I going into detail about this? Many people say that the Americans used our Soyuz spacecraft simply because it was cheaper. That's not true. The Americans understand the value of prestige very well. For more than 7 years, we've been forced to hitch a ride to space. I'm going to make you a promise. Soon, American astronauts will return to space on American rockets launched from American soil. Again, the question arises, half a century ago, you had your own rockets, which also launched Apollo into orbit. The first Apollo 7 was an orbital mission, achieving orbit. I acknowledge your question, and perhaps we'll meet again. I don't intend to search for many arguments. 5 should suffice. Excuse me, dear host, one more point. To recognize a forgery, we don't count signs of authenticity but point out discrepancies. So far, I've pointed out 2 discrepancies. I believe we will highlight a few more significant ones.
Do you believe that the crew did not die in the Challenger disaster of 1986?
First, my education, thanks to those who taught me, and working with my colleagues have taught me not to believe, but to weigh all arguments and information and come to a conclusion. What official information is there? Even lies can be official if they are issued under the signature of the relevant department, organization, or person. I have not seen any reports suggesting otherwise. Finally, there's common sense. Please tell me, what would be the point of blowing up the Challenger and hiding the crew? I can only raise my eyebrows at such a notion. As they say, no answer.
Alexander Ivanovich, I wanted to hear your opinion on whether modern humanity is ready to explore the moon and which country might be capable of doing so.
I have thought about this many times, so I won't dwell on it for long. If we consider a research base, I believe that although I won't live to see it, establishing such a base on the moon is a feasible task within the next century. Scientific bases, human presence on the moon, even the moon as an intermediate space station, are not trivial matters. Since a mission to Mars and beyond requires enormous masses, a large complex can gradually be assembled on it. However, I have never considered and do not now consider industrial exploitation of the moon to be realistic. I believe those are populist talks. It's not just a case of the game not being worth the candle. It's that multiplied many times over. In short, the benefits are negligible and offer no economic efficiency. Unfortunately, physics can lead to rather sobering conclusions about further space exploration. First of all, what have we lost in our solar system? Let's list it. Mercury is a blazing inferno. By the way, read a good short story by Clifford Simak, Operation Mercury. Beyond that, we probably won't get anything useful from Mercury. Do you want clouds of sulfuric acid on Venus and temperatures of 500 degrees Celsius on the surface? What would we do there? Mars is also a lifeless planet. The pressure there is similar to what we experience at an altitude of about 30 kilometers on Earth. No water, nothing, just cold. Let's take care of Earth instead. I don't even want to talk about the horrors of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and all the subsequent planets. Now, let's dream about missions to stars. This is my favorite topic, as I used to dream about it myself. The nearest star is 4 light-years away. That means light takes 4 years to get there. Our modern rockets travel at 10 kilometers per second, while light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. I don't know how many millions of years it would take to get there. Well, thousands of years. I also want to point out the psychological aspect. You've returned from such a long journey. Who needs you on the Earth you returned to? New generations won't need you. You'll be some kind of a strange creature. Maybe they'll put you in a museum under a glass dome as an example of what ancient humans looked like. My conclusion on this topic is that we need to take care of our Earth. I recently discussed this with my colleague Starigan, and I want to share something with you. Compared to military expenditures, the costs of space exploration are negligible. Let me give you specific figures. The annual budget of the Soviet Union was about 600 billion rubles, roughly equivalent to the same amount in dollars. The ruble was a bit stronger back then, but that's not important, roughly the same amount. Expenditures on our supergiant N1 moon rocket were 0.5 billion per year. The N1 rocket also has an interesting story. It wasn't such a failure. It was quite feasible. Why did I mention the budget of the Soviet Union? Half of that budget went to defense needs. Approximately 300 billion, or some might say 200, I won't argue. 300 billion versus 0.5 billion. a difference of 600 times. Space exploration, if not military, does not bankrupt us. There are no enormous costs. On the contrary, it stimulates interest and thought process greatly. Even to understand that we shouldn't strive to go to the nearest star Proxima Centauri, we first need to understand the distance to it. Esteemed hosts, I want to say that I am a contemporary of the moon missions. Unfortunately, I am turning 80 this year. I remember all of it. I remember the disappointment. I'll try to keep this brief. You know, we lived in poverty after the war. I remember my mother having dinner with just onions, water, onions, and black bread. The children were fed a bit better. The country was devastated, and we lived in poverty. But gradually, we were rebuilding, and most importantly, we felt that we were the first. The first satellite, the first man in space, Gagarin. There was technical progress, which we believed would lead to a better standard of living. And suddenly, bam, the Americans were the first on the moon. It was as if the air was let out of us. There was a widespread sense of disappointment. You know, life is a struggle at all levels. In any field, if you have low morale, you are a candidate for defeat. This is what I want to talk about more in detail next time. Of course, I will quote some sources, but what I'm going to talk about, I have personally experienced.
Let's give our thanks.